I'm going to be mostly talking about native wildflowers, spring, including everything pretty much before June 1st, and covering our herbaceous plants, not the woody plants. The woody plants being trees and shrubs and similar, which those of us with allergies are really noticing. A lot of those are blooming right now. But, you know, biologically, there's a whole separate category within botany for the woody plants, as was herbaceous. Herbaceous plants typically die back each year and either come back or start a new plant from seeds. So these are just the herbaceous ones. So one thing I want to talk about is why bloom so early. Particularly for our ephemeral flowers. Ephemeral means fleeting. So we have a whole bunch of spring flowering plants that pop up really quickly in early spring, and the entire plant will die back down, you know, in a matter of weeks or maybe a couple of months. Whereas many of our plants, you know, starts in spring or early summer and then lasts to the end of the year. If you think of goldenrods, they're going to be sprouting from the ground. They won't bloom until August or whenever, but the plants will stay until they fade out in late fall. Many of our spring plants pop up before the trees have leafed out. So they're making use of all that solar energy before the trees manage to leaf out. And then they get their blooms because they have co-evolved with some of those early insects for pollination. So I noticed while I was out, with some of our native bumblebees are already out. I saw 8 species of butterflies on my walk. So we've got some early emerging butterflies. We've got some flies emerging, and some of our spring flowers are pollinated by ants. So they make use of this early time before the trees leaf out. And if you notice, by June or so, the trees will be fully leafed out. The understory in the woodsy areas are not going to have a lot of flowering plants, because most of any plants on the forest floor are not getting a lot of sun. So not too many plants start sprouting in the summer or bloom out. So that's why early. So here's actually a picture of an early spring flower being pollinated by one of our butterflies that overwinters as an adult. So as soon as the days warm, like today, this butterfly is flying. This is an eastern comma, and it might look a little bit tattered and worn. Well, this butterfly emerged from its chrysalis late last summer. So this butterfly's already been alive for 8 or 9 months. So that's why it's available, one of those butterflies that's available to nectar on this early flower. So I am going to march through our springtime, just talking about a bunch of different flowers that you'll see, and where you might get to see them. So first one up, trailing arbutus, arbutus being a Latin family. This likes rocky, shallow soils. So, and it grows extremely close to the ground. Around this picture, you're seeing pine needles. This was up on Catoctin Mountain. And the bloom, March, April. And the leaves for the arbutus will stay after the blooms have faded. And the blooms stay open for probably, you can see them blooming for a couple of weeks time frame. And arbutus is largely in these not very fertile soils. So this is not a woodlands, leaf debris type plant. This one is actually right on a bike trail, or was. I have not refound this population because plants are changing and the ecosystem there is changing. But it is scattered around the state. Fun to find. The entire plant is less than an inch tall. So it's very tiny. Again, many of our spring plants are small, particularly the early ones. They're getting up quick. Some of them, even if we had snow in a normal year, some of them could actually come up through snow or would pop up right after some snow. So, this one is another tiny little plant with these tiny, tiny little flowers, ivy-leafed speedwell. The Latin family group is Veronica, which is so nice. We have several species of speedwells. Most of them are non-native. They have naturalized. I just noticed I've got the ivy-leaf speedwell growing at the base of my post box. So they grow all over road edges, any place where they can get some good sun. I may have some coughs. I have tree pollen allergies. So spring beauty. Spring beauty is pretty widespread, and it is a spring wildflower of deciduous woodlands. It likes a richer soil and fairly moist soil. I have seen really good populations along the Monocacy. Walking north from Pine Cliff Park, there's the trail that goes up that way, and they've had very good populations up in that area. It's widespread, and there is some color variation. You can get some very white flowers with limited pink veins. These ones I'm showing are light pink with a lavender veining inside those petals. And so there can be a variation from very pale with just a little bit of pink or almost no pink, all the way to more lavendery. And these only grow about 3 inches tall. And you might see quite a few clumps. They pop up fast. They'll be blooming for several weeks' time. Individual blooms will fade. You'll get a new bloom out. And then within a couple of weeks, the leaves will have died back as well. They've done their job. Right next to that spring beauty is a tiny little flower. You see a little sprig coming up of really minuscule flowers. That is a cress. It's in the mustard family. There are probably hundreds of species of plants. Many are not native, many are native. I do not even attempt to tell the cresses apart because there's just too many of them. One common factor, most of the cress flowers are white. There's a few that are yellow, and they always have 4 petals. So, and most of our cresses are edible. So here's a beauty, round-lobed hepatica. And there are two forms of hepatica. Most of Maryland only has the round-lobed, which actually refers to the shape on the leaves. There's also the sharp-lobed hepatica, which is very, very uncommon in the state. The flowers of hepatica are most often this pretty soft blue. They can be a lavender, they can be white, they can be, occasionally see a little bit of a pink. Those ones like to be full sun, often on like a hillside. So they tolerate fairly shallow soils. I have seen them up in the Catoctin Mountains, up near Hog Rock area. Those are already blooming. Because of course we are having an early spring emergence on like everything. So they're already out. their bloom cycle is very, very short on those flowers. So the flowers pop up, they bloom. The leaves start while the flowers are still blooming. So the flowers pop up first, and then it's going to have the leaves pop out. The leaves will mature and eventually die back in summer, early summer. So here's a fun one. These are all over the county. Dutchman's breeches. So I've got a cute close-up. So you see that flower shape. Can you imagine the old-fashioned breeches from the 16 to 1700s being hung up by the part from the knees on like a clothesline? That's what these look like on their little stems. Again, these the whole entire plant is only 3 to 4 inches tall. They might, an unusually tall one might get to 6 inches tall. They love deciduous woodlands. So they are pretty widespread. They also like to sort of be moist. All along the C&O Canal, on near the Monocacy River, also in Catoctin Mountain in the more moist areas. They're quite widespread. And they're just really fun. And the leaves in the background are the leaves of that plant. The Dutchman's breeches does pop the leaves first and very quickly pops up the flowers. And the flowers only take a couple of days to progress. They'll stay open as these flowers are. They will stay like this. They're going to shift colors. They're going to get a little grayer and dingy looking as they age. And they will fade out. And shortly after the flowers fade, the leaves will also die back. So they're another ephemeral spring flower. So one of my favorites, the yellow trout lily. It often grows right alongside those Dutchman's breeches, might be mixed in. Some areas on the C&O trail or just off the C&O have big areas where there's hundreds of trout lily plants. Trout lilies have a very, very short bloom time. They are a lily, and most of the lilies are poisonous. And almost all lily family plants either have 3 petals or 6. Generally, things will be in multiples of 3 with the lily family. So yellow trout lily is our more common. It's quite widespread, but never in big numbers. And they're blooming right now. So they won't be blooming long. They fade really fast. So there's another one with a fast fade. Bloodroot. Bloodroot is a localized plant. Again, wants super rich soil, wants that damp soil. Almost always I find it near water bodies. C&O Trail is a good spot typically. Beautiful, pure white petals. The petals come up, the entire plant comes up together with the petals wrapped, the leaves are wrapped around the petals. The flower part comes up, opens up. The leaf will open up slightly, it's going to be quite small. The flower on the bloodroot each flower only opens one day. If it's female, it's gotten pollinated, it will go right into its seed pod. And that's it, the petals fall right off. So each plant, if it's a mature plant, will have a couple of flowers, but again, very fast bloom. And as the flowers fade, the leaves enlarge and grow to help feed the root systems. So these are popping up from their roots each year. So here's a fun one. For years, I mispronounced it. I used to call it bluets, but they're bluets. And these are tiny. These little flowers are only maybe 1/4 of an inch across. One flower on one tiny, skinny little stem, only coming up 2 to 3 inches. Again, you can kind maybe able to tell that that's in a sunny, really sunny spot. And bluets might even form a fairly large mass where you see a whole bunch of them. And they tolerate some of our drier soils. So find them mostly in the county. I found them in the catoctons, but they're just scattered about. These are also can be called Quaker ladies because of that blue color. Well, the Quaker women from Pennsylvania in years past wore that kind of blue. So for the bluet, and we have a couple of species of bluets. These are more common and the ones that pop up first. And they'll bloom for a couple of weeks over all the plants will bloom. The leaves are not very big and noticeable. So the fun is the flower. Here's a pretty picture. 2 non-natives together, grape hyacinth and dead nettles. So a friend of mine, in fact, just put up on Facebook a beautiful picture of an entire field, fallow farm field. It's completely covered in grape hyacinth. It's not native. It's, people planted it as an ornamental and it's invasive. Dead nettle, again, you see that everywhere. Those fields that tend to look with that purpley haze, that's going to be the dead nettles. Dead nettles are in the mint family and edible. Not the grape hyacinth, though. So, white trout lily. This is far less common. We're known, Frederick County has one known area along the C&O Canal for the white trout lily. And it is a separate subspecies than the yellow. And they spread from their root systems very, very slowly. So the good news is even when the Potomac River has flooded, these floodplains where the trout lilies bloom, the trout lily root systems hold well enough that even after a flood, they'll come back. So, cut leaf toothwort. People always have fun with these old style names. Wort is an old English, truly old English term for flowering plant. Toothwort was a plant they thought had herbal qualities to help with teeth issues. Cut leaf refers to the leaf shape. We have 2 species of toothwort in the state of Maryland. But cut leaf toothwort is what we find here in Frederick County. Toothwort is up and blooming. It is in the cress family. So you notice the white petals and 4 petals. So that's another cress. Bluebells. I hope folks have seen them. They are not yet in full bloom. They have started blooming already, and this is fairly early, not over dramatic, but I actually I had some first buds back at the end of February after we had that warm spell. And then when we got cold again, the plants just kind of paused. We didn't keep pushing forward with that flower production. And now that it's spring, they're in full production mode. So the C&O is pretty much most of the C&O has Virginia bluebells on both sides of the river. The Virginia side has areas as well. I've seen populations of Virginia bluebells among the Monocacy, and they want very moist soils. So they're often in floodplains. So, and bluebells have color variations. For one thing, the buds start out pink. And they can start out a very deep magenta-y pink. And as they open out, they typically open out to this nice blue. Sometimes they're a deeper blue, and sometimes they're white to lavender. And I've also seen pale pink. One plant, and the really crazy thing, I've seen one plant producing multiple colors of blooms, and yet one stalk will have all the same color. I don't know how the plant does that. So very pretty. Those leaves start emerging largely in February. And they're what we call ovate. They're an oval shaped leaf. They start what we call basal from one area per plant, and the leaves will come up from there, and then they're going to send up the stalks with the flowers. The flowers bloom overall, it'll be a couple of weeks total time. Then the flowers die back. The leaves will continue to grow until the trees leaf out. And then those leaves are going to die all the way back. So you won't even, come summer, midsummer, you wouldn't have any idea there were any bluebells there because the plants will be gone. Well, the root systems are still in the soil, but there's nothing above the ground. There's that fun one. You probably have noticed in Frederick County and any other areas where we particularly roadsides and farm fields, you're going to have one of its names is simply field cress, the yellow cress. It's also sometimes called winter cress because it can be one of the first flowers to bloom. It was brought over to the United States by some early settlers to have something to eat first thing in spring. So the leaves are fully edible. And I happened to catch a really pretty, very, very fresh butterfly in nectaring on the field crests here in the mountains. That is a white M hair streak, which is one of, it's a less common hair streak, but we do see it often in April. So, but field crest has the 4 petals, but it's yellow. And these plants just keep getting bigger. They have a much longer bloom time. So, which I assume the settlers liked because you're getting all those greens from the leaves to eat. So, next plant is star chickweed. Now you might be familiar with regular chickweed, which probably grows in your yard, on the edges, roadsides, everywhere. The common chickweed is actually a non-native invasive and is fully naturalized, and it's everywhere. Star chickweed is our native plant. It's much, much larger. Those flowers are generally closer to about a ½ an inch across. Again, it, like many of our other ephemerals, it likes the rich woodland soils that are moist. So can be found with some of our other typical woodland wildflowers. I don't see it very often in Frederick County. There's a spot in Washington County, not far away, that's a cliffside, but it's a wooded cliffside. So it, even though it's a cliff, it has some good soils in there. And I see star chickweed there. I've also seen up in the Catoctons. I'll give you some insight on some of these great sites too. So here's another fun one with a fun name. The common name is squirrel corn. I have no idea how anybody got that name for this plant. In some of the more traditional books on wildflowers, it's a fern leaf bleeding heart. So you can see that heart shape. And it's a ferny, well-cut leaf like fern. So, but everybody around here knows it as squirrel corn. It generally emerges. So you might notice, if you remember the Dutchman's breeches, the leaves are almost identical. The squirrel corn leaf is usually just a shade darker on the green. And usually the squirrel corn emerges and blooms like a week after Dutchman's breeches is blooming. In some places, they're concurrent. So I was just at the CNO at Little Pool in Western Washington County. And right, squirrel corn and Dutchman's breeches are both blooming right now. So, whereas in Frederick County, I haven't seen the squirrel corn blooming much yet. I would expect it probably in a week or two to be blooming. So, we all love these, right? Common blue violets. Apparently, the really common ones also started out as a non-native many, many, many years ago. Almost every aspect of the common blue violet is edible. I don't know if you've ever been to something or fancy where they candied the flower. And traditionally, 100 years ago or more, to decorate a really beautiful cake, you might add the candied violets, which are edibles and beautiful. What's good is many of our native insects still enjoy the common blue violets, which of course are widespread. I've got a ton in my lawn. I love them because they are the host plant for the meadow fritillary butterfly, which is a native butterfly. So I like almost any plant that's going to be a butterfly host plant. We have many other species of violets. Last spring, I was down in North Carolina and I saw on a single walk in early spring, I had 5 species of violets. So even around here in Frederick County, and many of them are a little bit dependent on different ecosystems. And just to confuse things more, the common blue violet can have color variations. There's a pretty common form called the Confederate violet, but it's a color variation on the common blue. It's a white violet with deep blue veining on the inside. It's really pretty, and I've had up in the Catoctin Mountains again, I've had a blue violet that was what we call stripe. I can't pronounce the word. Styrated. Has stripiness to it of white and purple. I've only seen it one place, up in the Catoctins at the northern section of the Frederick watershed. All kinds of things, and violets can come in yellow or white, as well as various purples and blues. One of my favorite flowers, red columbine. So, many people like to have some columbine in their gardens to have a kind of early summer blooming on the domesticated type varieties of columbine. But we have a native columbine. We only have the one, and it's red, beautiful. It often is growing in cliff sides. So it's not the most common to find. It should be blooming in a couple of weeks. And overall, the plants they'll put out a series of blooms, so you can get a couple of weeks of bloom time from a single plant. So. And it's like, okay, marching towards May. We still have more flowers. Pussy toes. I love pussy toes. As I say, species. SP is short for species. We have many species of pussy toes. There are different heights, and they have little bit different leaf shapes. And so kind of a little variation on the flowers themselves. This picture was taken a little later in the season. These flowers, I believe, are actually the female flowers. Many flowering plants have female flowers and male flowers. Most of them have male and female. And the pollen is the male offering for the reproduction. It's the stamens on the female plants, and we're going to get seeds. So these pussy toes are getting closer to seeds that they will produce. But when those flowers are fresh and small, they're really soft. So it's really fun to take kids out and touch them like you would touch a kitten's toes. They're soft like that. So this variety is a fairly small variety. We have several different species in the county. Most of them I can tolerate not the most fertile soils. So I see them in parking, weedy areas in their parking lots. You might find pussy toes. I was out Little Pool today, and there's a hill right next to the parking area that gets mowed like crazy. So the pussy toes grow really, really short on that hill. And there's loads of them. But they've adapted to being mowed. So there's a pretty one in its bud stage. So a trillium has 3 leaves. So you see the 3 leaves on that plant. This is the nodding trillium. We have at least 6 species of trillium in the state. So that bud, when it opens up, is going to, the leaves will be out here, and the bud is going to hang, the flower will hang below the leaves and will nod down. So trying to get a really nice picture of that flower is a little challenging. That's when a phone is handy, because you can get it underneath the entire flower and look straight up through the plant. Trilliums consistently like a rich soil. So these are a woodland plant. Again, the leaves are coming out before the leaves on the trees are fully leafed out. And it's going to bloom. The leaves will develop a little bit further after the bloom, and then the entire plant is going to die back. Trilliums are ephemeral. Nodding trillium is not our most common. We have one, it has the same shape, overall shape of leaves when you're looking at a plant that's got 3 nice, good-sized leaves, but seems to have a little blotchiness on it. That is our sessile trillium, and the flower is right up. The leaves are out, kind of stay straight out in one plane, and the flower comes up in the center. It's our sessile trillium, and it's usually a reddish color. That is more common along the CNO in those soils. So a little variation there. The nodding trillium is found up in the catoctons. One that just makes my heart beat to see it, blazing star. It is a highly localized plant. It wants cliff type soils that are still fairly rich. It's a little challenge to get just the right soil. I have actually not found it in Frederick County. It's found right next door in Washington County. And there's another one that these ones, rue anemone, and I just love saying anemone. We have a couple of different kinds of anemone. We have rue plants. We have rue anemone, we have meadow rue, and we have a tall field rue. Rue anemone is the first of them to bloom by a long shot. It stays fairly low, and it's usually starting to bloom right when the blazing star is blooming. And I find one of the good spots is that same trail. It is scattered about, though. I have found it in the catoctons. So, this is it. Fleabane species. We have a number of different species of fleabane. There's a daisy fleabane, there's a Philadelphia fleabane, and there's a robin's fleabane. And they're not the easiest to tell apart. Usually the first out is the Philadelphia fleabane. And very common roadside flower. A lot of people mistake it for, they're thinking, oh, it's like an aster. It's got all those petals. Yes, it is a compositae. Compositae is the large family of flowers that are actually composed. Each of those flowers, the yellow part in the middle is the actual scent. The yellow part's composed of tiny, tiny, tiny little flowers, each one that has a petal or two of the white attached to it. So it's a whole bunch of little flowers smushed together. With fleabane is that way, daisies are that way, our cone flowers are also composites. The fleabane, particularly the Philadelphia fleabane, is usually our first stop. And I haven't seen any yet. But we're only the first week of April. And here's another one. Another great word, cinquefoil. Cinque meaning 5 shape. Cinquefoils have 5 petals. Strawberries are in the cinquefoil group. And there's a number of different plants. I don't really try and keep track of them all. I'll just go be, it's a cinquefoil. There's a couple that bloom in early spring, and there'll be a progression into the summer. And many of them produce little fruits that look like little teeny strawberries. And wild strawberries, and most of those are edible, they just might not taste good. And some of them taste really good. So, here's one of my absolute favorites, the bird's foot violet. I threw it in here, even though I have never seen it in Frederick County. It tolerates extremely shallow soils, extremely low nutrient areas, generally cliff sides and hillsides. The best populations are in the state are out in Allegheny County in Green Ridge State Forest. And they'll probably be blooming in a couple of weeks. They're generally about a 3rd week of April peak. And there is another variation on the bird's foot violet that is a 2-tone. It has a light purple on the lower half and a dark violet on the upper. I like them. And they're called the bird's foot violet because of the shape of the leaf. It looks kind of, if you're imaginative, it looks kind of like a bird's foot. It's very deeply cut with only a couple of lobes. And that entire plant, it pops up, it blooms fast. And in a couple of weeks it'll be done, and the leaves will die back a few weeks after the flowers are done. So, fun one, Jack in the Pulpit. It's got that three leaves attached at one center point, like the trillium, but it's shooting up a separate stalk with the flower that is like a pitcher. And if you were to lift up the flap on that flower, you'd see that the stamen is right up in the middle, and that's the Jack that's in the pulpit. Once upon a time, before sound systems, the church pulpit would be a raised platform and would often have a little roof over it. So here's Jack in the Pulpit, and they are striped. They're really an elegant flower, and they're not uncommon at all in the area. They are a woodland, moist, rich soil woodland plant. And sometimes you'll get dense colonies of them because they're going to spread by those roots. One great place that's close by to see them is up at High Knob. They're at Gambrel State Park, closer to May 1st. Now, you might be familiar with spiderwort as a domesticated garden plant, but actually we have a native species of the Virginia spiderwort, which is fairly widespread across the state. Some areas it's more common than others, and you're going to just find it scattered around. It generally prefers a nice deciduous forest floor. because when those leaves from those trees break down, it makes for a nice rich earth. They have a very long bloom. It'll keep popping out buds. The individual plant will pop out buds. You know, the flower, each individual flower may only bloom for a day or two, but it's going to keep popping out buds for a while. And then the buds, the flowers will die back, and the leaves can get very large. They're like a lily leaf, and you can see it's 3 petals, so it's in the lily family. And the leaves will get pretty big before they die back. So it's one of our most beautiful, the pink lady slipper. In Frederick County, that's probably our most common orchid. So we do have orchids. Pink lady slipper is one of them. It's one of our showiest. It's a big flower compared to many orchids. And the hot spot for them again is, I know, surprise. Again, rich deciduous woods area. Although there's a lot of rocky substrate, and it seems to be just right for the pink lady slipper. And tell people, never, ever dig up a lady slipper to take into your garden. All of the orchids require very specific fungi and other organisms in the soil in a symbiotic relationship to prosper and bloom. If you take that plant away from it and put it in your nice garden soil, you've almost assured it's going to die and deprive the plant of its native place and ability to propagate. So there are yellow lady slippers as well. I have never seen yellow in Frederick County. I think there's a place, but I'm not sure. Pink lady slippers are a little bit isolated in the Catoctons. And they typically peak early May. The best population of those are by it's on the side of the park with the Middletown overlook. But I would avoid, if you're walking around in there looking for them, be careful where you're walking, because you don't want to trample on them. They are an orchid. So there's another beauty, Trillium grandiflorum. So they're going to the Latin name, or large trillium. Well, glandiforum is so much better. It's the biggest of the trillium, and it will get, even in bloom, it'll get close to a foot tall, and that flower can be 3, even 4 inches across. This flower is slightly pink. Those flowers all start out perfectly, beautifully white, snowy white. And as the flower ages, it becomes deeper and deeper pink until it's just kind of shriveled. And that only takes a week or so, maybe 10 days, maybe on the outside 10 days. And the grandiflorum has the flower above the plant. But it is on the stalk above the leaves. Those leaves will get huge towards summer, and then they will die back. Gorgeous flower, not common at all, hard to find in Frederick County. I've seen, my best location for it is really hard to stop and take pictures of it. It's on Route 219 near Cathedral State Park, as 219 goes from West Virginia to Garrett County in Maryland. There's a hillside, and right around Mother's Day, it is typically completely covered in Trillium grandiflorum. It's quite the sight. There's a neat plant. We're on a common name shift over, because the traditional common name is golden ragwort. Now, people think ragwort and they think ragweed, and they're like, it's weedy, it's nasty. So we're trying to shift the name to simply groundsel. Those buds, when they start, are beautiful burgundy, and then the flower pops open to this brilliant golden yellow. It's fairly widespread. It's fairly common in a variety of different ecosystems. So it likes a fairly rich soil. It doesn't take anything too refined. So, and it's not really unusual that older names, people get to the point for a common name and just decide, we don't like that name, let's change it. So I think, yes, my next one is another name that's been in the process of being changed. Older books will call it lousewort. Assuming that at some point in history, it was probably herbal and thought to fight lice, I'm guessing. But now it's simply called World Bethany. World is referring to turning, and those flowers look like they're turning. They kind of interlock around the top of the flower. It's fairly widespread, surprisingly. It doesn't grow very tall. It can be a yellower variation or this more common kind of wine variation. And I typically see them in May in full bloom. The leaves will last for quite a while. Fun one, wild geranium. I mean, we think of geraniums, you go buy geraniums for your flower, hanging flower pot, but we have wild native geraniums. They are very consistent with this beautiful lavender color. They like very rich soils. So often found in near floodplains and other areas with lots of deciduous plants. They're fairly widespread. Seen them in a number of places in the county, typically again blooming more towards May, or maybe even into mid-May. They'll have a fairly long bloom. Long for a spring flower is a couple of weeks. So not a real long one. Here's one we'll be seeing everywhere in May and June, and potentially even into July. They're usually pretty well done by July. They reseed prolifically. Dame's Rocket. That's a 4-petal, but it's a lavender. So it is also in the mustard family, but it's a non-native. And some people plant it, it just continues the spread of it. It's not a plant that bothers me too much for one. It's really pretty. But spring butterflies love to nectar on it. So I kind of like it that way. It usually doesn't get invasive, growing in massive clumps. There's some areas, particularly I've seen in some small creek floodplains, you'll see a lot just on the roadsides because it's tough. And it'll get a couple of feet tall. It's one of the biggest mustard family plants that we have. So, and this is my last flower picture. Oh my gosh, it's already 8 o'clock. I've been talking. May apples. Everybody else loves May apples. They typically bloom Mother's Day, start peaking. They are perennial, then they're going to come back. Many of our spring flowers are perennials. They come back every year. The first year the plant comes up, it will have 1 leaf. If it gets enough nutrients, the second year it will have 2 leaves and it'll start producing a flower, which produces a small fruit. It's a little like red apple shape that's got the seeds of the plants. So the plant propagates by seeds. It can also go by roots. They love floodplains, rich deciduous floodplains. You can see the forest area carpeted in mayapple plants. And those leaves will get enormous. I've seen 18+ inch leaves after the flowers have died back in May. And those leaves are still going into June. They can get really big, getting a lot of nutrients for that plant before they die back. So that's the rest of my flowers, but I wanted to give you a couple quick more things. Threats to native wildflowers. invasive plants. And invasive plants could be stuff that's been, Thames rocket could be a problem if it grows in larger clumps and chokes out our natives. Speedwell's known for doing that. The grape hyacinth is definitely known for doing that. It's pretty. And some of these plants did start out as garden type plants. The other thing is some of the invasive shrubs and such, greenbrier and things. They keep more leaves through the winter. They green up really fast in spring. So they could be casting shadows on the forest floor, preventing our ephemeral flowers from coming up. So, of course, human development, building more houses and building more shopping centers is definitely a threat to native wildflowers. As so many areas, they're filling floodplains, they're wiping out deciduous forests to build more houses, and it creates multiple effects, including the native wildflowers. Climate change, of course, is going to be affecting the native wildflowers, partly due to something called phenology. That is kind of the time cycles of living beings. So if a plant typically blooms in mid-April as a peak, and its pollinators are also out in mid-April, but suddenly things are being warmer, so the plant starts blooming earlier. If its pollinators aren't available, the plant's not going to spread. So that's one of the effects of climate change.
So I'm going to thank Kathy for her presentation. That was an awful lot of good information, and I was really impressed with how many places you know where the flowers are.
I go all over the place.
Yeah, you really, it's encyclopedic. It's really nice. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay, good night. Thanks for coming.
Bye.